The House That He Would Not Leave. A true crime horror story from June 10, 1910. Chapter 1. The Man Standing in the Rain. Seattle, Washington. The rain had been falling for hours. Not the kind of rain that comes and goes. The kind that hangs over a city like a curse. On a lonely street stood a man staring at a house. Motionless. Silent. Watching. Neighbors would later remember him standing there long after midnight. His hat soaked. His coat dripping. His eyes fixed on a single window. Inside that house lived his estranged wife, Elizabeth George. And although she didn't know it yet, she was being watched by the last person she ever wanted to see. But before we continue, if you enjoy true crime mysteries, forgotten horrors, and real cases that history almost erased, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because tonight's story begins with a marriage and ends with a courtroom trying to understand a murder that still feels disturbing more than a century later. And trust me, the worst part isn't how she died. The worst part is what happened before it. Chapter 2. The Marriage That Died First. Arthur George wasn't always considered dangerous. To many people, he seemed ordinary, quiet, respectable, forgettable. But behind closed doors, something darker was growing. The marriage was collapsing. Arguments became frequent. Trust disappeared. Fear entered the home. Elizabeth eventually reached a point where she could no longer endure it. She separated from him. For Arthur, separation was not acceptance. It was humiliation. And humiliation can become an obsession. Witnesses later described how he seemed unable to let go, unable to accept rejection, unable to accept that life was moving forward without him. Every day, his resentment grew. Every day, his thoughts became darker. Until eventually, he convinced himself that there was only one solution. Chapter 3. The Shadow Outside the Window. Weeks passed, then months, but Arthur remained trapped in the same mental prison. People began noticing him near places Elizabeth visited. Sometimes he appeared unexpectedly. Sometimes he simply watched. There was something unsettling about his presence. Not because he shouted, not because he threatened, but because he stared. And those who have studied violent crimes know something terrifying. The most dangerous people are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are the quiet ones. The ones who spend months imagining a future that exists only in their heads. The ones rehearsing a crime before anyone realizes it. The ones waiting. Chapter 4. The night of May 13th, 1909. The evening seemed ordinary. Street lights glowed weakly through the darkness. People were returning home. Businesses were closing. Nothing suggested that tragedy was only minutes away. Arthur knew exactly where Elizabeth would be. He had planned for this moment. Witnesses later described hearing sudden chaos, then a gunshot, then another. Panic erupted. People turned. Some screamed. Others froze. Elizabeth collapsed. The attack happened so quickly that many could hardly understand what they had witnessed. One moment, she was alive. The next, she was dying. And standing nearby was the man who had once promised to love her forever.
Chapter 5. The horror after the shots. Most true crime stories focus on the moment of murder, but often the most disturbing part comes afterward, when reality finally arrives. The noise fades. The adrenaline disappears. And everyone realizes what has happened. Witnesses stared in disbelief. Some rushed to help. Others
chased the killer. Blood stained the ground. People shouted for doctors. But the damage had already been done. Elizabeth George was gone. The city woke the next morning to shocking headlines. A husband had murdered his wife. And nobody could understand why obsession had been allowed to grow unchecked.
Chapter 6. The Jail Cell. Arthur was arrested. The public wanted answers. Reporters wanted details. The courts prepared for trial. Yet something strange began happening. His defense lawyers argued that his mental state should become part of the case. Questions emerged. Was he fully responsible? Was he insane? Was he calculating? Or was he something in between? The legal battle became complicated. Because sometimes the hardest thing in a murder case is not proving that someone killed. It's proving exactly what was happening inside their mind. And minds can hide terrible secrets. Chapter 7. The Courtroom of Ghosts. The trial drew attention. Witnesses described the failing marriage, the separation, the tension, the growing obsession. Every testimony painted another piece of a disturbing picture. Jurors listened carefully. Family members sat in silence. Lawyers fought fiercely. And over everything hung the same question. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Many people believed yes. The warning signs had existed. But warning signs often seem obvious only after blood has already been spilled. Chapter 8. June 10th, 1910. More than a year after the killing, the case reached another dramatic chapter. On June 10th, 1910, legal arguments surrounding Arthur George's conviction reached the Washington Supreme Court. The case became part of history. By then, Elizabeth's voice was gone. Only court documents remained. Pages, testimony, evidence, arguments. The cold language of law, trying to explain a very human horror. A woman was dead. A husband was imprisoned. Families were shattered. And nothing could reverse what had happened. Chapter 9. The twist nobody expected. Most people think true crime ends with a verdict. It doesn't. The real ending comes when we ask why. Investigators eventually realized this case wasn't born on the night of the shooting. It began much earlier. The murder weapon was not the gun. The real weapon was obsession. The crime started the moment one person decided another person's freedom was unacceptable. Long before the trigger was pulled, the tragedy had already begun. That is the twist hidden inside countless murder cases. The final act is only the last page. The real horror is everything that came before. Chapter 10. The Window. Years later, people forgot many details. New crimes appeared. New headlines arrived. New scandals replaced old ones. But stories like this leave a shadow.
Because somewhere in every city, there is still someone standing outside a metaphorical window. Someone unable to let go. Someone consumed by resentment. Someone feeding an obsession. And history teaches the same lesson repeatedly. Most monsters do not emerge suddenly. They are created slowly. One grievance. One fixation. One obsession at a time. When people hear the word horror, they imagine haunted houses, ghosts, demons, monsters in the dark. But the oldest horror is none of those things. The oldest horror is obsession. A force powerful enough to destroy families, end lives, and leave scars that survive long after the people involved are gone. Elizabeth George became another name in history, another victim whose story survives mainly through legal records. But behind every old court document is a real person, a real life, a real tragedy. And perhaps that is the most chilling truth of all. The monster was never hiding in the shadows. The monster was standing in plain sight. The end.